to Leader You by Black River Performance Management, where we believe work should fuel the human spirit, not drain it. In this leadership podcast, we will dive into the lived experiences of people flourishing in today's workplace and beyond. Join us to hear real-life examples of experiences from our own lives and from the leaders we know and trust. Hi, it's your friend Angie Leone from the Leader You podcast. Today I want to talk about culture, and it's something that's super important to me and to my husband Rob. People create culture, whether it's by design or by default, and we create cultures in our homes, in our workplaces, and in our communities that make those places where we want to spend our time or where we don't want to spend our time. Last December, Rob and I met Dr. Diane Johnson on a retreat in Baja at Modern Elder Academy, which was a very awe-filled experience. During our retreat, Rob and I had lengthy discussions with Dr. Diane, and we recognized her wisdom and heart for creating organizational cultures where everyone can thrive. We shared this same passion, and we wanted to have Diane on the podcast to highlight her perspectives, key ingredients, and essential questions for leaders to consider when enhancing organizational culture, since this has been her area of expertise for over 25 years. I wanted to distill some of her wisdom for our listeners who are passionate about creating cultures where humans thrive and organizations flourish. In her podcast, her insights point to how can we build and support collaborative teams within our organizations. In the podcast, Dr. Johnson defines culture as the pond we are swimming in, and she dives into a variety of culture building topics like appreciative inquiry and the importance of systems thinking. She talks about building a culture of reciprocity and respect across departments, and she enhances the importance of recognizing leadership transitions and how important succession planning is. She discusses how we all have leadership blind spots and that those need to be addressed. And we have a need for more professional development to build our skills and capacity to support our continuing embodiment and execution of what we're called to do. She asks some thought-provoking questions that you can take back to whatever culture you want to co-create. Some questions like, how do we co-create the world that we want to live in? Or who will notice if you're no longer in existence as a company or as a social service? And how do we participate and engage and co-create the beloved community? And what kind of culture do we want to create? And what resources are we willing to invest? How do we break down silos that serve as a barrier to our organization's effectiveness? What niche and what need are we fulfilling? How do we find ourselves where we are? And what will facilitate a positive impact, and what should we pay attention to when things are not working? Dr. Diane shares a quote from Howard Thurman, and I think this really embodies her passion for co-creating cultures where everyone feels valued, supported, safe, and has a sense of belonging. And that quote is, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." If you want to go make a change in your culture, whether that's your family, your church, your friendship circle, your organization, there are definitely some gems in this podcast for you. I hope you enjoy learning from her as much as I do, and I hope you'll share this message with someone that you know that needs to hear it. Thank you again for listening to the Leader You podcast, and I hope this gives you some information to think and ponder and act on. I'm really excited to have her here today to talk to her about something that we're both very passionate, and that is culture. Culture within our organizations, within our societies, and culture overall. So I think it's a highly important topic, and I am so excited to have her on the podcast today. Thank you, Diane, for being here today.
Oh, I'm so excited and absolutely delighted to join you this morning. Really great.
Yeah, so can you tell our listeners a little bit about your story, what you're doing now, how you arrived there, and what kind of, has it been a linear progress or, all over the place?
Right. So, I mean, I think this question about how we find ourselves where we are professionally, personally, community wise, um, it's a really interesting question because the dominant narrative is that you somehow, in growing up, figure out what you're supposed to do. If you're, if you figure out what your major is going to be in college, you study it, and then somehow miraculously you find yourself in a job that goes on for however long, right? Or at
Mhm.
least that was the narrative that those of us who are boomers came
Mhm.
out with, right? And I think that is, in a sense, a myth,
Mhm.
in a way, like that life constantly gives us the opportunity to explore what we're passionate about, and if we are honored, privileged enough to actually identify what makes us come alive. It's like the Howard Thurman quote about how we need to figure out what makes us come alive, and then the world needs us to do that.
Mhm.
Right. And so this, for me, as a Black woman growing up in Los Angeles, I was a product of public schools, when schools were amazing places to learn and full of college prep. So I went, and then went to University of Pennsylvania, moved from LA to Philadelphia to find myself in a completely different culture on
Mhm.
the East Coast, and loving that, and being, so I originally thought that I was going to start study political science, and I was going to be a lawyer, and then I was going to, aspire to leadership in the judicial realm,
Mhm.
because at that time I thought the way to have impact was through the law.
Mhm.
And after taking, one political science class and a law class, I was like, yep, nope, that's not going to do it. But because I grew up in LA and Hollywood, I had an understanding of the importance of entertainment, of culture. And so I ended up studying communications. So
Mhm.
my first career was in communications. I worked for the networks. I worked for CBS, ABC, public broadcasting, sales, marketing, affiliate relations. And and that was, and I was so thrilled to hear early in my career from a career specialist. She said, "Oh, do you know that people change? Like, how many careers do you think people have?" And I was like, "I don't know, like two." She was like, "No, it's more like five." Like, great. I got lots of opportunity to figure out what it is. And for me, the theme has always been about service, has always been about positive impact, um helping the, not just helping the world, but actually helping transform and change the world, to be in a world that I and others, that I want to be in. So how do we co-create the world that we want to live in, right?
Mhm.
So I discovered not-for-profit work, discovered social sector work, was in initially was in fundraising, doing fundraising consulting, helping raise money for many, many different organizations. But out of that, I was like, but what are we raising money for? So this question around strategy, this question about how do we have the strongest impact, whether it's in our communities, whether it's in our businesses, whether it's in our, churches and synagogues or mosques, like how do we um, participate and engage
Mhm.
to co-create what Dr. Martin Luther King called the beloved community.
Mhm.
And so I think when we think about organizations, whether they're businesses, whether they're small, whether they're soulpreneurs, or solopreneurs, it is about what is our purpose?
Mhm.
What are our missions? Now, what is our mission that then helps us have impact, helps us to have effectiveness in our
Mhm.
organization. So that led me to doing to really pursuing academic context.
Mhm.
So I've done a master's in nonprofit management. I have a PhD in interdisciplinary studies that I designed in Tufts University, where I matched sociology, organizational behavior, management, nonprofits, and collaboration, right? And because, I think it's very, very important that we build our skills and our capacity,
Mhm.
that supports our continuing uh, embodiment and execution of what we're called to do, like
Mm.
this notion of purpose.
I have goosebumps.
So that's a very long-winded way. So now I found myself I have it's been 25 years, over 25 years that I've had a national management consulting firm
Mhm.
called Mmapeu. Mmapeu is a Xhosa name that means woman who carries ideas. And
Mm.
so I've been really honored to have worked with over 12,000 leaders and organizations across that almost 30 years now. That and if there was a theme across all the organizations that I work with, it is about how to build their effectiveness and impact in the industries that they are operating in.
That's incredible. Wow, what an incredible journey, and probably not one that you thought it was gonna end up that way, right? How do you define culture?
How do I define culture?
Yeah.
So it's that fabulous quote. I forget Tom Peters or somebody who said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I say culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I think the easiest way for us to think about culture is the pond that we're swimming in.
Mhm.
It is the water in which we are swimming in. Either yeah, so everything has culture. The behavior, standards, norms, expectations that drive how we interact.
Mhm.
So there's a culture in our family
Mhm.
about whether how people interact with one another, how they communicate with one another. Right, that happens at a family level.
Mhm.
That happens within our organizations. It's like it's almost if you were to um if someone were to ask you what are all the unsaid notions about how we behave in
Mhm.
our organization, right?
Mhm.
That's one way of thinking about at its simplest level, how we think about culture.
And
And
how we
one of
do
the
things
reasons
around
that
here.
it is the most powerful um, element in our organizations and in society is that because culture is what sets norms, sets expectations and standards about how we interact, how we communicate, what we believe,
Mhm.
right? So it is probably the most powerful mechanism within any particular um, circumstance or at any particular type of any particular type of setting,
Mhm.
right? And that's and it's and there and it's so powerful because it is like this, the water that we swim in. What do fish talk about? You can be pretty sure it's not water because they're in it,
Mhm.
right? Culture is that water that we swim in.
Yes. Another way I've defined it too is just this is how we do things around here,
Yes, yes,
right?
right, exactly. This is how we do things,
Right.
right?
Yep. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of organizations and be in different cultures. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there's often unspoken culture. And like you said, and then there's the spoken culture, like it's on the wall, but that's not actually what's happening. Could you speak to that?
yeah. So and it's really interesting because so much of my work is about how do we take those values,
Mm-hmm.
those mission statements, those the statements, in some instances, the platitudes on the
Mm-hmm.
wall, and how do we actually operationalize those?
Mm-hmm.
How do we embody those?
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, my most common example is almost every organization has some uh, idea about that respect is part of the culture
Mm-hmm.
um, within a business or within an organization. And but then it's like, but what does that actually look like?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How do you treat if any particular value, whether it's kindness, whether it's effectiveness, whether it's efficiency, whether it's compassion,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's impact, but the question that we is so important organizational leaders and also all across the levels within an organization, but how do a particular set of values, how do they how are they embodied, how are they operationalized?
Mm-hmm.
So so if we look at respect, let's say, okay, well, the respect is a core value. Well, how do you know that you're being respected? Well,
Mm-hmm.
it might be, does an organization have an understanding about what is respectful communication? How long does it take for someone to get their email answered, right?
Mm-hmm.
How like respect, I talk about how time is a social equity issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? How we use it, how we're aware of it, how much we take up, how much we share it. So if respect is a value within an organization, well, then might, and this is a key, like how often are we in staff meetings where, well, like the staff meeting is supposed to start at 9 and people roll in, well, when we used to have staff meetings in
Yeah.
person, but right? The people kind of would roll in around 5 after or 10 after, right? And and so again, that's the culture, that's the norm. Like we know that we've got a window to when we can show up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I asked them, but if time is a value, and if time is a how we use time is a reflection of respect, well then let's be clear about what our assumptions are about how we show up,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's like a simple example of how do we operationalize the values that assist us in having a really healthy, impactful organizational culture,
Yeah.
right?
So let's just say you were having that respect or trust or one of these values, and you're trying to embody that, and that requires some accountability, doesn't it? Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, I think, one of a key components is that we have to have the ability, and I think this is essential in leadership and organizational leadership. We have to have the ability to have, I'm going to say, a radical sense of self-reflection. We have to be able to really look at how we show up. I mean, and this is why I think 360, the
Mhm.
process of doing 360 feedback
Yeah.
is so, so, so important within organizations, because because very, very often there's a difference between what our intention is
Hmm.
and what our impact is.
Yeah.
Right. And so we as an organizational leader, as a team lead, might have have an intention around any number of things. Right.
Hmm.
But but how do we know how we are acting, how we are managing, how we are supervising, how it's landing on those people that
Absolutely.
we are collaborating with, that we are working with. And so unless without feedback about how any policies, procedures, behaviors
Hmm.
are actually landing on people, how do we know whether they're having the positive intent and positive um, impact that we want? Right.
Absolutely.
So I very often there'll be people like, why do I need to get, why do I need to get feedback from a full range of people that I engage with? Well, well, then how do you know what positive or or unconscious negative impact you're having in an organizational system? Right.
Absolutely.
So this ability to be reflective and to identify, I think this is really important, using appreciative inquiry, starting from a place of assets. What is it that we are doing within our team, within our company, within the system that is working well? I think it's essential that we start with what's working well,
Hmm.
right? And then we can say, all right, so and what are those components that are value added into the work that we're doing. And then after we identify what's working, then we get to say, and then where are the tensions? Where are our challenges? and how essential it is not to come from a place of blame,
Mhm.
but come from a place of curiosity and inquiry,
Mhm.
and have an understanding that we are collectively
Mhm.
involved in a mission, involved in co-creating, again, either in a business setting or in a social sector setting or in a community setting, and how important it is for people to have an understanding that we're working together, and what's going to facilitate
Mhm.
positive impact, and what do we need to pay attention to when things are not working.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you. We love to use 360 degrees surveys for people, and you're right. It helps in their personal development and their
Mhm.
self-reflection and understanding their own self and their emotional intelligence and everything else. Um, it also
So true.
helps, yeah, and there's no, if you can't fix something if you don't know that you're doing it. And we all have blind spots,
Yes.
right?
And
And
I
yeah, go ahead.
no, and I think this piece about blind spots is really essential. I mean we as human beings that are working in all different types of
Mhm.
settings and situations, and I mean I'm thinking about that incredibly famous TED talk by Brene Brown, right? And where she talked about um, measurement, and does it matter, and what I love about so much of her work is that she helps us understand, like, the wide array of what it's like to be human, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that talk about shame and that talk about blame. And I think it is really, I mean, it seems like a BFO, a blinding flash of the obvious.
Mm.
But because we are human beings that are full of foibles and full of challenges and anxieties, as well as successes and passion, but that how important is within our in our business settings, in our organizational settings, in academic settings, to just how important it is to recognize that it's not about that we are supposed to be perfect,
Yeah.
that we are as human beings, it's not if it that we will make mistakes.
Right.
And so then it is this wonderful question about, and where are the learnings from those mistakes
Yeah.
that actually allow us to continue to develop
Mm.
personally, professionally, in all those, emotionally, in all those other ways, right?
Absolutely. And that brings me to the topic of oftentimes I can tell if it's a learning culture or a know it all culture. And
Hmm.
we know that when they have the learning culture, there is this openness, this curiosity, this willingness. Attitude towards it's okay, we're learning, we're growing, we're moving, and they have that expectation. This know-it-all culture is where we don't have psychological safety, where you're in trouble and there's no real there's no real grace. And they're striving towards perfection versus progress and collective collaboration and love work. I mean,
Yeah.
we say love and compassion for people that we work with. Y-
I remember, oh my gosh, at least 20 years ago, being at a lecture at Stanford Business School, and I'm trying to remember the management guru who was giving a presentation. And he went on this long presentation and he asked this one question, like, what is the most critical element to success in organizations? And people were like trying to figure it out, right? And then it was the last PowerPoint slide was this big heart. And he talked
Mhm.
about love.
Mhm.
And I think that speaks to that impact, and effective organizational culture is related to relationships,
Mhm.
right? That it is how we build and support and encourage authentic relationships between one another that leads to effective communication, which leads to collaboration. Like, if I don't know how many countless studies there are from, HBS, Harvard Business School, about the impact, or or businesses and organizations that are the most effective are those who prioritize relationship,
Absolutely.
right?
Humans aren't
And so, and this
resources.
is why, that this,
Yeah.
when we think about the evolution
Yeah.
of management and leadership, where, when we think about the very beginning of Daniel Goldman's work around emotional intelligence, where, and people are like, well, why are we teaching people that? Right? This is like 25 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And it's because
It's still here. It's still where I live.
because
They're still wondering.
it's so common, just like emotional intelligence ain't so common. And especially in the dominant culture
Yeah.
that is so hyped on ego and so focused on like pathological individualism and all that. So the skills and capacities related to emotional intelligence, which directly relate to relationship building,
Hmm.
is so crucial in in building strong and effective leadership teams.
Yeah.
Right? Because when it comes down to it, I'm imagining, Angie, if we were to think about some of our biggest challenging clients, right? And um, that so often it boils down to the capacity of the leader or
Excuse me.
leaders
Excuse me.
within an
Yeah.
organization, right?
Yeah.
And and how the lead the level of, it's not just importance, the 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 role of leadership within any particular organization and the skills and capacities necessary to create organizational culture that leads to people wanting to work hard, wanting to collaborate, wanting to have an impact, willing to look at what's not working.
Yeah.
That so often is directly related to the culture
Hmm.
that a particular leader has created within their business or within their organization,
And then there's
right?
there's the individual person that I'm thinking of. Let's just say they have to have some difficult feedback and they're just not very good at getting feedback. So then they might have insecurities and they might take it wrong. And that's an issue too, where we have to really think about how the individual contributes to the entire culture.
So and Angie, this is why the coaching industry
Is booming.
continues to like expand
Yes.
exponentially because
Yeah.
people recognize, oh, I need some assistance
Yes.
helping me, manage, build our understanding, build our skills
Hmm.
in that, one to one. I
Hmm.
mean, I literally think I think it is why executive coaching, once it got hold
Hmm.
within various landscapes and within various ecosystems, all the way from, started with corporate, but now is in faith-based organizations and academia and, you name it. You've got coaches, whether they're personal coaches, life coaches, or, specifically coaching around strategy, management, and leadership. The reason that it just continues as a best practice is that because we recognize that we don't know everything, that
Hmm.
we have that we have various strengths and
Hmm.
various challenges, and just in the same way that in order to be, I mean, the Olympics are coming up in July. I'm
Yeah.
so excited.
Yes.
Um, uh, at Summer Olympics in Paris. But so that notion about using what people experience in the sports realm, it's like if you're going to be the top of your class, the top of your game, you need someone who can train you. Well, now
Common
we
sense.
recognize it's the same within our businesses and within our organizations.
Thank you for joining us on the Leader U podcast, sponsored by Black River Performance Management. Leader U is an important part of Black River's initiative to bring high quality leadership development and organizational performance improvement solutions. Leader U is one of our initiatives that features different speakers whom provide their expertise and perspectives on a variety of workplace topics. I invite you to visit our webpage at www.blackriverpm.com. That is www.blackriver, the letter P as in performance, and the letter M as in management. We offer a wide range of services from training to performance improvement, coaching, retreats, and group facilitation and strategic planning. Our focus is to assist people in better understanding how to lead effectively and impactfully through a variety of evidence-based tools and practices.
I have a question about that. So one of the things that I've been seeing too, and I don't know if you see this at all, but I've been seeing that a lot of corporate organizations are fine with it and they see the value and they do this. But a lot of the nonprofits that I'm seeing still kind of live in this scarcity mindset of we can't do that or my board wouldn't approve that. Or I can't even imagine asking my board for coaching, even though they're executive director. Now I see this often. This is Idaho too. So, but I'm telling you, like a lot of their board members are from corporate organizations or banking or higher, and they are able to get professional development funds and they're able to get coaching and development and they're able to go to trainings and workshops and conferences, but that doesn't translate over to the nonprofit sector. Have you noticed that, or is this
Yeah, I think so. I think there was a particular wave. And I can tell I've been in the industry for a very long time
Mhm.
because and this is kind of a circuitous story, but I remember working with a not-for-profits in the social sector in the early 90s when it was like, oh, strategic planning only happens at the corporate level, at the in the corporate world. We as a not-for-profit, we don't need to do strategic planning because we are just responding to the mission. We're being called to help people in a particular way. So why would we need strategic planning? Right? That was literally that was the
Mindset.
narrative.
Yeah.
I'm saying like in the 80s, 90s. But then when and rightly so, when funders started seeing the impact, again, there was almost a zeitgeist of no strategy and being able to articulate organizational priorities and strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That is not a best practice only in the corporate sector. We need to start moving those best practices into the social sector.
Yes.
And what you had in at the beginning in the midway 80s for 20 years, a very well-funded organizational capacity building sector.
Mhm.
So you had the support centers all around the country. You had a Compass Point in San Francisco, where I was director of programs for a while. You had, and funders were funding the building of capacity
Mhm.
for the social sector. Fast forward like 10 years later, some of those same foundations started funding. In fact, I think it was the Annie Casey Foundation, and I think maybe it was MacArthur, I'm not sure, who funded let's look at doing coaching within the social sector.
Mm.
And that happened again in the early, when was that? That happened like in 2005, 2006,
Mhm.
all the way through in those early teens. So there was this acceptance of, oh, we're gonna do coaching for executive directors. There were leadership development cohorts of executive of directors and managers, and so that was a wave,
Mhm.
around understanding how important it was to build capacity at the leadership level within not-for-profits. I think what has happened now, in the early 2020s, is that because of the overall financial constraints and resource constraints within the sector,
Mhm.
that has fallen along the wayside. Very, and in fact, very similarly, if we look at all the work that we had both in the corporate sector and the government sector and the not-for-profit sector around equity, diversity, and inclusion and belonging, and really understanding that those were critical, those are critical elements around effective organizations and impact and pushing and creating access both at the business level in the business sectors as well as in the social sector. And especially if we look at so much work has been being done in the venture capital realm and entrepreneurship, and how do we fund more women? How do we get venture capital to more people of color? Um, Again, that was a really stunning wave in terms of recognizing what will support the strengthening of organizations. Now in 2024, so many of those senior VPs of DEI are no longer there. There's just this backtracking, and that's a whole other
Cast.
webinar we can have about that.
Yeah.
But I do think, I mean, and when I think about what leaders, what is helpful for leaders to think about is, how are you building and supporting collaborative teams within your organization,
Mhm.
right? Because we know that 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 strong teams who are effective at collaborating, that are effective in really understanding the entire system, the entire array of what's happening in the within an organization. How do we break down silos,
Mhm.
act that um, serve as the barrier, often serves as the barrier from organizations being as impactful, effective, and brilliant that they
Right.
can be, right?
Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about subcultures within cultures? So, for our listeners that we are just trying to learn as much about culture, like let's just say in one organization, you've got the organizational culture, and then in
Mhm.
each department and things like that.
Yes, yes. Okay, so this is why this is so interesting, because I think this is when a best practice that we've been using for decades can work. So there are a lot of people like, oh my God, if I have to do another strategic plan, just take me out, and let me, be miserable. Because I think a lot of times people have not had positive experiences in a strategic planning process.
Mm,
But one of the reasons why I'm such a staunch believer in doing some kind of, and maybe we have to come up with a different name, maybe we have to come up with like mission alignment, or design thinking about purpose. We have to call it something new,
yeah, and fresh.
different, because people are just use strategic planning, people just roll their eyes.
Hmm.
But the reason I believe in that is because it is, we have the amazing opportunity to think about, why are we here?
Hmm.
The critical question that I often ask: who will notice if you are no longer in existence as a
Hmm.
company, as a business,
Yeah.
or as a social sector organization?
Hmm.
Right? So answer that, and because that leads us to the question: well, what are we doing?
Hmm.
How are we making a difference? What niche are we fulfilling? What need are we fulfilling?
Hmm.
And creating an understanding across the organization. What are the various roles and responsibilities that need to get fulfilled
Yeah.
in order to fulfill that particular mission? Right? And so, because when we create activities related to that, that helps break down the silo. Because I, if I'm in communications, right, and someone else is in supply chain, there's usually that is, so far apart in the
Hmm.
organization. But if we have a process and activity that actually helps people understand the variety of the components, that we're making a quilt, or we're making a bank, whatever matter, like whether it's sewing, or whether it's, making a banquet, right? If we are co-creating, it's important to know all of the ingredients that we were making, not just the one, or the different courses. Right. I might be in charge of making dessert.
Yeah.
I'm in charge of, you know, a particular area within business. But it's really, really important that I know what also, like, what's the appetizer? What's the first course? So I'm thinking about food because I just watched the final episode of the 21st
Yeah.
season of Top Chef, which I
Yeah.
love. Right. But so this metaphor about co-creating together, co-creating a meal, co-creating a banquet. I think if we that helps us understand how important it is that people have a systems approach, has an understanding of the organizational systems
Yeah.
that then help us create respect across all the different components of the organization, right? And understand that my role is not just within that particular. I mean, yes, I have a role within my particular department, like
Hmm.
in communications, but I need to respect what they're doing on the shop floor,
Hmm.
right? And have an orientation around mutuality and reciprocity in terms of where it's that there is mutual respect, that there is reciprocity about listening, across, not just within our own departments, but across departments.
Yeah.
And that again gets to culture, because if leadership prioritizes understanding and communication across departments, because we are all on this organizational, really using different metaphors, on the huge cruise ship, right,
Yes.
where there are just so many different systems
Hmm.
to make that cruise ship go. But it's essential that the people who are in charge of the various parts are listening to each other, have an understanding about what's happening, and recognize that we are together, going in have decided that we were going to go on a destination and that we are going to get there together.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm
So
using metaphors.
I love all the systems thinking, and you're just thinking about the cruise ship and when I watched a show about what makes a cruise ship, and I'm just like thinking, yeah, the food, the entertainment, the water, the toilets, everything, like the everything has to work in harmony, right? And
Hmm.
what I notice in one of our models for human performance improvement, culture is at the top, and it's a mountain, and we've got all the pieces, but the top is the culture of the ice cap. It's like the ice cap, and when that culture is good,
Hmm.
you have some grace.
I mean, I love, and I'm trying to, I love that whoever created that iceberg,
Yeah,
around, like, what are the pieces that you see above the iceberg
yeah,
culture, but then what are all the things underneath the surface of the water, and
right.
how it's so important that in our organizations we have an understanding of the entire iceberg,
Mhm.
not just what's on top, but also what's underneath,
Right.
right?
So so what would be in your experience as you see healthy culture, what would be some symptoms? And then we'll go into the symptoms of a toxic or unhealthy culture. Like what are the types of things you see in a healthy, thriving culture?
Oh,
What would you see and how would the people feel?
that's a fabulous question. I think, um when I think about thriving organizations, and this is, um there is deep respect.
Hmm.
There's also, I'm going to do a stretch here, there is joy.
Mm,
There is
yes.
a sense of excitement. There is a sense of being connected to the purpose of the organization.
Hmm.
And I'll use uh, an example. I remember there are these fabulous new electric trucks called Rivian, right? The design is just cool as
Hmm.
anything, right? Because I used to live in the Bay Area, so they were all over the place. I was like, "Oh, what's that?" And I went to their website, and I mean, after reading their mission statement, it's like, I don't know anything about car or truck manufacturing, but oh my God, if I did, I would work for this company,
Yeah.
because they are taking their sense of purpose. And this is, I think, another thing that's about another indicator or characteristics of a healthy company is the the quality in which they articulate why they are in existence. And their mission statement was the most just inspirational, talked about multi generations and building a world like around, because Rivian is an electric car, right?
Hmm.
So it's about, so how do we steward our land, and how do we it's just fantastic. Now, And I also know that I think that they're because they're so innovative and so forward thinking, it's like the industry hasn't caught up with them.
Hmm.
But I think, again, characteristics where you're actually able to articulate in a way that reflects values, that reflects passion, that reflects an understanding of that organization's place
Hmm.
in a particular ecosystem,
Hmm.
right? And within that, and because of that, there is a level of acknowledgement. There is a culture.
Hmm.
There is an ongoing way that people are acknowledged, that people are affirmed.
Hmm.
There is again, like another way of reflecting respect,
Right.
right? I would also say um characteristics of a impactful, thriving organization is that you understand the diversity that you have within your organization. And I'm talking and this is the power of what we've learned over the last couple of decades, and definitely in the last decade. The diversity is not just about ethnicity,
Yeah, for sure.
right? It is not just about what I call M&Ms. Like, oh, look at all the different colors we have, right? In the organization.
Mm.
But that there needs to be a desire to have a range of different lived experiences, right? So that might mean that in an organization that you have people who have different educational backgrounds, you have or and that you have an understanding that different lived experiences can contribute, or like that your people department, your HR department has figured out how important it is to have different lived experiences represented in teams, right?
Absolutely.
Which means very often that we have to look at our processes about how we recruit people. How do we look for people who we hire within our organizations?
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Again, that's another podcast.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We could keep going for sure.
You know what I'm saying? So that there is a like when I think anywhere from okay, we can go from as simple as because I just had dinner at an amazing restaurant
Mm.
where I live, and when you walk from the time that when you walked in the door, there was a particular sense, a particular feeling, how people got welcomed, what the place looked like, how how wait staff were engaging with customers, how wait staff was interacting with the kitchen.
Hmm.
That there is literally there was a perceivable vibe. I'm sorry, I know that sounds new agey, but there is an essence
Hmm.
that you can feel.
Hmm.
And I would hazard to say most people recognize it, both
Yeah.
on the positive side, on the negative side. Like when you walk into a store, do you feel do you feel that you as a customer or a client that you matter?
Hmm.
How many times have people walked out of the store like, yeah, no one even bothered talking to me? I'm like, yeah, I'll go somewhere else,
Yep.
right? Or that we just tolerate that because it's like, oh well, what can we expect?
Hmm.
Mm, But those organizations, those businesses that really understand that, they do well,
Yep. Absolutely.
right?
Culture beats strategy every time. Right.
Yeah. Right.
And
So if we look at what's not happening,
yeah.
right, within the like what and again, I can imagine every person listening to this has either worked in or encountered um, a workplace that was toxic.
Yep.
I might not even use toxic, but it was like, people kind of roll their eyes. It's like, oh gosh. I mean, what's the the stats still, Angie, in terms of people's satisfaction with their workplace?
Super.
It's still relative. It's not as high as it should be,
Mhm.
given how many hours we spend working.
Yeah, we're giving our
Right.
more time to our work than we are to the people we love and the hobbies and the things we like to do. So we want to make sure it's a place where we're thriving and where it fuels our spirit and we have joy and we show up with compassion and love for other people because we're not more like we're always going to have the perfect day, but that our hearts are in it and we're doing the work that is meaningful. And if we're not, let's not play.
I think, and this is so true in terms of when, if we think about the expectations of different generations around the workplace.
Hmm.
So we know now the millennials and beyond, like millennials, and then I forget, like Z and what, like whatever the categories. People who are now coming into the workplace, they have a very, very different narrative about what they expect from their workplace.
Hmm. Yeah.
Right. They want values alignment, right? They want the level of respect that they not just want, that they demand.
Hmm.
And again, that's another podcast because you can talk about generational differences about expectations
Hmm.
um, around careers and the role that a workplace has vis-a-vis an individual uh, employee. But so that the what people expect in their workplaces related to work-life balance, related to personal development,
Hmm.
related to not just personal development and also engagement
Hmm.
in and I'm thinking about small to medium-sized companies,
Hmm.
right? Where like I have a very, very close colleague, and he's running a company that only has 100 employees, right? But they've got 3 offices.
Yeah.
And again, a split generationally, like half the staff is like, boomers, and the other half are millennials and even younger.
Hmm.
And so they're one of their biggest tension points is the expectation that their I'll say younger employees have about being able to have voice around what like the policies and procedures within the organization.
Hmm.
Right. And me as a boomer, I'm like, excuse me? This is a privately held company, right, that is owned by a bunch of partners, right? And you're not a partner. But so there's again this culture
Right. Hmm.
around my ability to actually have a say in what happens at the
Hmm.
company,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it is a I think it is a very, very we're in a very, very interesting time within businesses and organizations because there is I would say that there's a pretty substantial difference in terms of how people um conceptualize their role as an employee within an organization. And again, at least for small and medium size, not so much I would say in corporate,
Hmm.
but even in some instances, just in corporate life. Like great example. How many um uh corporations and businesses, everybody's working virtually.
Hmm.
And then, you know, COVID kind of stopped or it shifted, it changed. And then there are any number of businesses that's like, okay, everybody come back to work.
Hmm.
And let's just talk about the number of people who are like, excuse me,
Hmm.
I've been working virtually for 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years, and actually our productivity has gone up.
Hmm.
So don't tell me because you have this narrative about people have to come back in the office.
Hmm.
Right. So how do we negotiate that,
Right. Yeah, it's a lot. It's
in
all
times?
culture work and negotiations and conversations and compassion and then some kinds of, each culture gets to handle that the way they like. And some cultures are going to be more open and some aren't. And some that,
Yes.
like, and that's okay. It's okay if this isn't a culture fit for you,
Yeah.
right? Like oftentimes when I end up coaching people, they're finding that they don't really fit the culture anymore, or
Mhm.
it's going in a different direction than it used to be. And so they just don't feel like it's something that aligns with their values.
I and I think this is I think a as an amazing question. I remember, I think it was Jeff Brundy, who was a partner. He used to be a partner at Bain Consulting, and then this is a really interesting example about the Ford Foundation. A number of funders funded partners from Bain to actually create a social sector not-for-profit consulting firm called Bridgespan, and Bridgespan is now I think almost 25 years old, right?
Mhm.
Um, that was again that that wave of building organizational capacity within the social sector. But Jeff said you always have to have the right person in the right job at the right time.
Mhm.
And I think the same thing is for leadership.
Yeah.
You have to have the right leader at the right time,
Mhm.
right? Um, right, and what's their appropriate role.
Yeah.
I think that the conversations that we think that happens much more, that needs to happen much more in the social sector, is this notion of leadership transitions, and how do we get the right leader at the right time, at the in the right place,
Mhm.
because of the seismic shift that is happening, um especially within the social sector, but I would also even say in the business sector.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And that succession planning and development of those new leaders is key. And I think HR is going to have a really huge piece in this. And the focus needs to be on the humans that create the culture in the organizations that they need or that we need for the future. There's so much AI and computer learning. I think there's a quote, I have one here that is the biggest challenges to digital transformation is not technology, it's people. And I really believe that HR has an opportunity here to really focus on developing people and not just focusing on policies and protecting the organization, but really developing people, engaging them, training them, giving them skills, if they're moved up to a manager or a leader role, they are not competent as a leader just because they were good at the tasks of their job. People leading is different, and human behaviors and emotions, that all is a different skill set than the skill set of the actual job that they usually do. And that's one of the huge areas that I see the biggest gap is not giving them the tools they need to be successful, or the space and grace and psychological safety to ask questions, to say they need coaching, to say that they're not sure how to do this. They are afraid.
Hmm. No, I think this is so true. I mean, I think that there is again, this is why I think 10 years ago you started having real creativity in recasting HR.
Mhm.
It was like talent, like we didn't, it wasn't human resources where, we're talking about widgets, like
Mhm.
human beings are widgets and we have to just put them in the right slot and like let them stay there. But that all of a sudden, like, director of people, talent management, like really understanding
Mhm.
that role is so crucial. It is not just a perfunctory um transactional role, but it is one of the critical roles around, and that it can have a critical role about influencing culture, because you are responsible for recruiting and retaining the talent
Mhm.
that is going to create successful and impactful teams,
Yes.
right? So this idea of like the development necessary
Mhm.
to be impactful leaders, and I think this is actually, again, because I was situated in the Bay Area for such a long time, that with tech companies, where there was such a focus on coding and the machinations of the physical, like what does it take to create? I don't know anything about coding, right? But
Yeah.
but it was really about, oh, do they have the skills to create the next new amazing innovation? But but these same folks who were being elevated to management were so challenged around management skills,
Right.
around supervision, right?
Mhm.
Because, like, if you're used to, this is a stereotype, but
Mhm.
if you're used to, you know, kind of being with your computer is your best friend,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So those skills and competencies around listening, communication, a strategy, feedback, all of that. And so I think as when and this I think is especially true when an organization, when a business is trying to go to scale and you were just trying to get people to fill the seats because you're what you're creating isn't is responding to a real essential need.
Yeah.
Um that question about how do we get talented folks in the seats to then not just to do the work, but how do you get people to manage and supervise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this question and why, trade organizations and networks and everything about related to talent management and HR are so important. But I think, and I'm imagining that these conversations have been happening for
Mm-hmm.
for forever and ever. But I think in these times it's even more critical,
Yeah.
right? And how are we investing?
Right.
How does any one particular organization, business, how are we investing in our talent, in our employees, and in our managers and leaders?
Mm-hmm. From a big picture view, what would it look like? What would some of the symptoms be from an unhealthy culture? What would one feel like in that kind of a culture?
Yeah, so I think a real immediately, like when you see people leaving, like when your retention numbers are down,
Mm-hmm.
right? When people are staying only a year, 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the big one of the biggest indicators that there is something challenging within your organizational system is when you have people leaving,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's expensive
Especially
because when you
talented
think about
people.
the time and resources that it takes to recruit and onboard folks,
Yeah.
and when you are having like a revolving door within your organization, it's important to look at like what to look at that,
Yeah.
right? And if you're noticing, if you like, it's very, very interesting. So for instance, if you're on LinkedIn and you see one particular company and you see a whole range of um roles, that now sometimes that's because an organization is new and it's scaling.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about an organization that has that has some anchoring, that's been around for a while, and all of a sudden both line staff are leaving, as well as your managers and directors are leaving, that's a data point,
Yeah.
right?
And if it's a board
Like,
and there's 5 or 6 people leaving the board, that's another
yes,
unhealthy
exactly.
culture, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Why are people
Yeah.
leaving?
Mm-hmm.
And this again, underutilized resource. How many times do organizations not have exit interviews?
Too often.
And or or don't invest in having exit interviews that are about those courageous conversations,
Hmm.
and not, again, not just perfunctory.
Right.
Like, oh, I asked those standard questions, check, 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 see ya, bye.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. What
We have to have curiosity.
We do. We do. And it takes time. And that's the part that I think is one of the biggest obstacles is that people are focused on checking the box instead of staying curious and really not, and we can easily turn into judgment. Well, they're lazy. They didn't do it. They didn't want to be here. They left for $1 more. That's the easy route. The easy route is blaming other people. The harder route is looking at ourselves, looking in the mirror, seeing what part we play. How could we impact, what could we do differently?
Right. And I think that curiosity in terms of, in that radical self-reflection, what's really important about that is, I would say that those questions also tie to what kind of culture do we want to create?
Hmm.
Like, so it is both what's our purpose of our organization, our business, but then in fulfilling that, what kind of culture do we want to create? Right? And what resources are we using to invest in 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 across the organization, but especially within the stars. Yeah, I mean the stars within the company. I
Hmm.
mean, I think this is again the difference in terms of what has happened generationally, because there was at one point a time where medium size, or even and especially even large business, large corporations were investing, like the people had a professional development budget.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And this is something that I actually really offer my clients as a best practice,
Yeah,
that you need to find a way in investing in your people
for sure. Or
and
you're going to
investing in
lose
your
them.
staff. And so that
Mhm,
very, very often means it could be meager, right? It
mhm,
could be, all right, every year, maybe it's even, I don't know, for one, that you have I really, really believe in this. I
yeah.
think the need to have a staff retreat, the need to actually bring everyone together to have a, I'm interrupting myself. A staff retreat is really critical. A climate survey,
Mhm,
an annual survey that asks people the questions about how are we doing, how are you feel, how is your relationship to your supervisor, how connected do you feel to your department, how connected do you feel to our organization, to our business,
yeah.
right? Because that's the report card
Mhm,
that helps you every year,
yeah.
helps you identify what your assets, what your strengths are, as well as what your opportunities are and where are your challenges, right?
And when you're
And
in
if
the
you don't
weeds,
ask
yeah.
people that question, how are they experiencing, how are they experiencing their work life? How are they experiencing the organization? How else will you get that level of feedback? And related to that is some kind of staff gathering that brings people, that creates an anchor for this is who we are, this is how we are affirming you,
Mm,
and I understand that is really challenge, that for some people it's like, well, our margins are so tight, we can't do that. Well, but in my sense, like, how can you afford not to?
that's a good
Because
question.
if you create a culture where people feel respected, seen, their ability to contribute, they will work harder
For
in a
sure.
good way, right? They will
Yes.
be more connected to the mission of the organization and be invested in the success of the organization.
Yes. Absolutely.
Not that I have an opinion about that.
What's the advice you wish you could give your younger self?
Oh my gosh. Um, wow. What's the advice that I would give my younger self? Oh, um, I, the, I would have, it would have been incredibly, incredibly helpful, for my younger self to know, um, um, how, um, how important it was to stop my profound self-critic.
Mm,
Like, if I would have heard earlier in my life how important it is to shift my relationship with my inner critic, so that I wasn't so often just completely paralyzed with a sense of that I was not good enough,
mm,
right? And to recognize, um uh that this is that and to recognize the level of talent the level of talent and brilliance that I had earlier.
oh yeah.
So I would say that I spent wasn't until I was in my 40s,
Hmm.
that I was like, oh, like I kind of know a lot of stuff, like in a good way,
Yeah.
right? Like that my profound curiosity that led me to really explore so many different things, that was a superpower,
Hmm.
in contrast to, like, oh my god, Diane, you should just decide on what you want to do,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I had mentors say, You got to pick something," right?
Hmm.
I was like, and so, had a significant amount of self judgment about that. How could I be interested in such an array of different things? Well, that array of different things makes me actually a stunning professional, and
Hmm.
has created a level of leadership, because I have such, like, that I operate in so many different, spheres,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I'm a management consultant working in business. I work, within the social sector. I'm also an ordained minister. I do a lot of work in faith-based and spiritual settings, right? And that's a really eclectic combination, that that breadth of experience really supports my ability to be really effective in an amazing array of places,
Yes.
right? And so now that I'm much older than 40.
Yeah.
Uh, so now it's like, oh, right.
Yeah.
That it has been, yeah. And yeah, so I think that's what I would have said. Like, stop beating yourself up,
Yep. And I
right?
think that's
And
a
be
great,
patient and be more patient with yourself.
yep. Give yourself a little bit of grace and
Yeah,
some love
yeah,
and just don't take yourself too seriously and enjoy the ride.
yeah, 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 yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
appreciate your time and your perspectives and your wisdom as it relates to culture and what that looks like, what healthy culture looks like. How could people find you if they wanted to learn more?
Great. So yeah, they just go to my website. It's www.mapu, M as in Mary, M as in Margaret, A as in Apple, P as in Paul, E as in elegant, U as in unusual.com. And that'll tell you more about our company and the work that we do. Yeah, and then there's a contact me tab on our website, and that we'd be delighted to talk to folks. And if um I want to think about what's one thing that I want your listeners to walk away with. And I think, please don't underestimate the power of your heart
Oh yeah.
and the power of connecting intellect and our brain um and our body and our hearts. And the reason I say that is that, you know, intellect and intelligence and knowing about tactics and strategy and understanding the market and everything, that's a crucial component in effective organizations. And if we are going to build the world, if we're going to build the community, support our businesses, be in um co-create spaces that allow everyone to thrive and flourish,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to have to do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that doing things differently is understanding that we have multiple intelligences,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, um, collaboration, all of what we've been talking about on this podcast are instruments that will allow us to create businesses and organizations that can see, really see and respect and love humanity.
Yeah, that's so good.
And in these days and these times, I think it's absolutely essential that we respect each and every person, even though there might be differences of opinions,
Yeah.
and find where the common ground is, and realize that every single person deserves to be respected and affirmed.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Right. And so how do we build communities that really understand that and can embody that and that can do it?
Yes. Let's all do it. Let's create some ripples of impact around that respect, generosity, and just putting it into practice.